with that speech.
The Canadians are going to come in for the rally?
Well, that wasn't, I don't think that was authorized, but there's a famous case involving a Marxist scholar from Belgium, I think, who was coming to an academic conference. It was kept out, and the court said Congress can do stuff in the international realm on immigration that it can't do domestically. But can it adopt a religious test? I think not. I think you're going to have a very hard time. If a court believes this was religious discrimination, I think they'll strike this order down. But the really tough question is, can you prove that this was religious discrimination? Because the president's going to come in and say, no, this was security. So when his people were asked on TV over the weekend, well, why didn't you add Egypt and Saudi Arabia? They said, well, we might. You know, so they may get around it by showing this really was based on security. They relied on the Obama list. That had nothing to do. There were 40 Muslim countries not on the list. So it's not about that. The other thing that is evidence either way, it could be evidence either way on this, is that there's an exception that says even though the no people from these countries, when the refugee, when it's actually in the refugee part, it says no refugees for 6 months, but there can be an exception for people who are minorities in their religious minorities in their home country. Everyone knows that's about Christians. There's no question it's about Christians. The Christian right has been lobbying in Congress, has been making noise about how Christians can't get in. Trump repeated those statements. It's obvious that's what
Doesn't it
that's what he's talking about. That? Doesn't say Christians. It says religious minorities.
Doesn't it say Christians and other religious minorities?
No, I don't believe so. We can have the language here. I think it just, I mean, you're right to read it that way because that in fact is what it says, but it doesn't say that. I mean, but yeah, but I have the order here. I think I sent the order around. So.
Has the president ever been challenged like this before?
Challenged in what? Oh, that challenged. Okay, yeah. Sorry. I couldn't resist. Hold on here. Let me first answer this around. Steps necessary proclaimed. Notwithstanding the temporary suspension, the Secretary of State and Homeland Security may determine to admit individuals on a case-by-case basis, including when a person is a religious minority in his country or nationality facing religious persecution. It's written for Christians. Now, what the administration will say, it doesn't say Christians. And there are groups like Yazidis who have been terribly persecuted by ISIS in Iraq and Syria. Where was the mountain? Iraq or Syria, maybe both. So they can say, no, there are other minorities here, and it was written for them. Why write that exception in it? So it's going to require a judge to conclude that this was, like the acting attorney general concluded, that this in fact is religious discrimination. That's going to be tough to show. I think it's going to be hard for a judge to conclude that. Not impossible, but maybe there'll be some other emails that are discovered or something. But it's going to, so I'm not at all certain that this order will ultimately be held unconstitutional. And even if it is, the government could then simply reimpose it by issuing it again, by taking the top 10, security countries, or say, top 10 countries that have sent terrorists and put it back in, even if it's all basically goes back to his decision to ban Muslims from the country. So let me finish the sentence, and then we can take questions on this. So we're in a very sad place here. I think everything the president said he was going to do, he's done, except appointing special prosecutor for Hillary Clinton. But on this one, he said that he wanted a Muslim ban. It's clear he tried to put lipstick on a pig. Am I allowed to say that anymore? Maybe you can't use that expression. He tried to, take a bad order and write it in a way that could pass constitutional muster because it didn't say it was about religion, but everything he said during the campaign makes one think that this in fact was based on religion. This was the purpose of the ban. That should never happen by a president. It should never happen to refugees. And in fact, it violates the refugee. You go back and read the convention. You look at the first week, there's a prohibition against discrimination, including discrimination on religion. So I'll just tell you this is a long paragraph, I'm sorry, I'll give that to you. But, when I was at UNHCR, I got a call from a minister in a state I won't name saying, we'd like refugees, but we'd like them to be Christians. And we want you to send us Christian refugees, and I said, we can't do that. We don't do that. We just, it's illegal under international law, so we can't help you on that. And so it's clearly illegal under the convention, and the question is it illegal under the Constitution? But more importantly, can you prove it in court? And I think that's the big issue to face. The other last point here is I'm really disturbed by the reduction from 110,000 to 50,000 refugees in the current state of the world, because the United States has not done its share on Syrian refugees, which it should have done much better on. Should have been much larger numbers, but moreover, there's no reason for it. If the if the president now determines that there are adequate procedures in place, and all he has to do is look at the ones that are there, and he can say, and what he'll do is there'll be a couple of tweaks, and he'll say, now I've made us all safe. It's like building a wall to stop a non-existent flow across the border. I mean, you make your own problems, and then you solve them when they weren't problems to start. But he'll come up with something that now protects us, I think, or maybe not. Maybe he'll say it'll never be safe enough. But if that's true, then why cut the numbers? If you put in place security procedures that keep us all safe, then what's the basis? And so there's no explanation given why those numbers can be cut. So I'm actually working with a group now, and maybe some of you would like to help out on this, trying to come up with a campaign to attack this reduction in refugee numbers, and a bunch of ideas are floating around, but one of the ideas is to get Americans to put up on a website, empty rooms in their home where they would house a refugee and try to get to 60,000 overnight, and to show that we're not scared of refugees. We'll put up we're going to think about something like that, but we got to get these numbers back up. And we have to put pressure on members of Congress to do this. I'm sorry, I'm not supposed to be political and supposed to be neutral on this, but I sort of feel strongly about this one. And who was, you the one who yelled at me for saying proud tradition last week?
Yeah. I didn't yell. I said, really?
Yeah, well, no, you didn't yell for that. But I'm beginning to agree with you that maybe we certainly don't have a proud, whatever it was is not proud anymore, and maybe we've just gone up and down our whole existence. Sometimes we're good, sometimes we're not so good. But for people who care about refugees, this is a really bad thing. Sorry, Emma, I went on and on and on, but go ahead. Yeah.
So my question is, if Trump is saying that he wants to prioritize religious minorities, but you can be a refugee based on persecution for 5 different categories.
Yeah.
I don't understand how that alone isn't proof that this is based in religion.
Well, that's a good question. Yeah. I think it's okay to say you'll take religious minorities because you're not distinguishing between religions.
But he's saying specifically prioritize religion.
Yeah, but I'm saying, so there are 5 different grounds, persecution. So he could say this year we're only taking people who have political claims. I think that would be permissible. It's when you choose one religion over another, because that violates the Establishment Clause saying Congress shall establish no religion. President can't choose one religion over another. And maybe it's discriminating against atheists, I don't know, but or non-affiliated people. But I think that's so. I think if they can really show that covers any religious minority, I think that would be okay. Actually, it's when you show Christians and not Muslims that it seems to me to be clearly not possible. Yeah, Kimberly.
Well, you were first.
No, go
Were
ahead.
you? I'm sorry.
So what about the countries, the link that people have been saying that Trump's businesses that have ties to countries haven't been affected?
Yeah, I mean, again, what the lawyers will try to do is undercut the claim that this is based on security, right? Because if you can show there's no rational relation of security, then a court could throw the law out on simply being irrational. And so if you can show, well, isn't it interesting they had hotels in every place, that they didn't have it, or it was religion or whatever, it would undercut the security justification, which is already pretty weak, as I said. So that would, there's nothing, it's a corruption charge. I mean, this goes to the emoluments. I mean, we're in uncharted territory here on this. So I don't know, but I think there have been a couple of articles written about that, and then maybe that'll be used to say, judge whatever you're thinking, it wasn't about security, so it's got to be about something else here. I'm sorry, Sean.
Back to religion.
Yeah.
If you're protecting religious minorities, are you not discriminating against people who are refugees from the religious majority?
No, because these are people who are suffering persecution.
Right, but if
Yeah.
if the president is come out and said this is about Islamic extremism, which is like
Yeah.
a term that he particularly wants to use, then that is known to be separate to just regular old Muslims, or that's a separate thing. If you're an extremist,
Yeah.
that's not a religious thing. That's separate to people, and those
Yeah.
people are also being persecuted,
Yeah.
but not as a minority, not as a
Yeah.
religious minority.
You could, yes, in a Muslim majority country, you could have Shia being persecuted by Sunni or Sunni persecuted by Shia, depending on majority minority.
But I'm saying
status.
extremists persecuting non-extremists.
Yeah, or yeah,
Which
right,
is-
right. And that would be, you could make a claim for asylum, and you could enter as a refugee based on religious persecution. But he is picking a particular group. It doesn't say you can't. I think the only thing that's going to get a court going is if it's one religion over another. If there are groups within religions that are evenly applied, I don't think they'll have a problem with that. Because the problem is that if you look, and you'll see in the materials for the Week Under Solutions, the 2017 designation, they get very particular. I mean, the State Department really says we're looking for these particular groups. There are very tight lines that are drawn with all sorts of priorities given for particular groups. And you could say, so they'll take Congolese refugees from a country, from Tanzania, but not, I'm trying to think of another refugee group. Not Ivorian refugees from Liberia. What's the justice? Isn't that national origin discrimination, preferring one over another? That's allowed. That's going to be allowed, so long as you're not really operating on a prohibited characteristic. If you decide to take only white refugees and not black refugees, then there'd be a problem. There has to be something in the Constitution that's prohibited. So I don't think that claim would work. Yeah.
Not to like
Amen.
beat this to the ground, but
Yeah.
but if all the religious minorities and I'm not sure of the answer to
Yeah.
this, but in those countries that you listed, if none of the minorities are Muslim,
Yeah.
then isn't that the same thing as saying that no Muslims are?
Yeah, that will be used. Yeah, that will be used to show this was in fact favoring Christians, and they tried to use neutral language, just the way Rudy Giuliani tried to use neutral language to make Trump's order illegal. That's what he said he was doing. Now, the court would have to find it was done with that intent, right? The fact that but they're going to find non-Christian minorities. They already have non-Christian
Then
minorities.
that's explicitly excluding Muslims if they're not minorities in any of those countries on the
Right,
list.
unless, I don't know, maybe the government will come in and say it could be if Shia or minority in a country, Sunnis, that maybe that, I don't know what religion means.
Yeah.
Is it a part of religion, is the whole religion? So the government's got a lot of ways to come in and say, it's not just Christians here. And we don't know, It was, I had no doubt it was stuck, because I watched this on the Hill for 5 or 6 years, where there was demands of, every time I'd go up the Hill to visit members of Congress, they'd say, why aren't you taking care of Christian minorities? That was the demand, and these are the guys who wrote this thing. But they're smart lawyers. I mean, they wrote it, not that smart, because they had protests at airports, but they wrote this thing carefully so that they can make these kinds of claims that it was not about religious discrimination. And they may well win on this. They may well have done it well enough to win. That just means they're won in court. The question is what, I think the real crunch will come when members of Congress go home and church groups come in, because the church groups have been very strong. Most of the Christian groups don't agree with this. Right?
Catholic Charities Incredible.
Yeah, I mean, they're now, some of these are major resettling organizations and they don't like to lose clients, but put that aside. But this is not, and the Pope said this, right? It's not what Christians do. And Trump doesn't like criticism from the Pope, so he told him so. So I think it will change if it changes at all, because members of Congress feel the pressure in home districts from faith-based organizations saying this just doesn't fly. But we don't know. We don't know if that'll happen or not. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
if the government wins this, what happens next? Is there an international framework or institution that can hold the U.S. accountable?
No. The United States, no. They can be criticized by a vote of the General Assembly of the UN, which is not going to happen. I don't think. Maybe it will. I don't know. That'll only happen when Trump cuts all the dues to the UN and end up in criticism. No, there's no international tribunal that can hold the U.S. Liable in any way for this. And domestically, Republicans control the House and Senate, and even if they passed a bill, he could veto it, and it would require 2/3 to overcome it. So it looks, I think the only thing that can change it is popular protest. But this president, I think, welcomes popular protest because it gives him a justification to take harsher measures. I think he's looking forward to popular protest. But it doesn't mean there shouldn't be popular protest. But we're in for some tough times here. Nothing I've seen like this in my lifetime.
How is this any different? How is this any different to what individual European countries have been doing? Not the EU, but like individual European countries putting up fences and stopping. Is this any different?
The difference is a couple. One, that's stopping asylum seekers, not changing a refugee program. So it's stopping a flow, and they said a mixed flow of people that they couldn't get control over. Second, Germany took 1 million.
Right.
Europe took 1 million. They all ended up in Germany. Germany ended up with 1 million asylum seekers over the last 2 years, which is a very large number. But it's not a lot different than the EU-Turkey deal, where the EU said stay in Turkey and don't come. We'll talk about that later in the term. It's a fair question. There wasn't this there wasn't this sense of favoring Christian over Muslim refugees. I think that's a big difference. They just don't want any refugees. But there's certainly Islamophobia throughout the right-wing parties. In fact, there's more Islamophobia. It's a stronger element in political parties in Europe than it is in the United States. There's no American party other than maybe the Nazi party or the KKK or something, but no respectable party in the United States has an Islamophobic plank saying we don't want Muslims here. Even the Republican Party, I shouldn't say even the Republican Party doesn't say that, but it's common in populist governments and the populist parties in Europe to say we don't want any more Muslims there. So there's similarities. There's similarities. It's just that the U.S. has been such a leader on resettlement and such a strong supporter for refugees around the world. The resettlement in Europe is tiny compared. It's a few thousand here or there. The 1 million that were taken by Germany they were people who came on their own and they were accepted. They weren't sent back. But the actual overseas program of bringing people in is much, much smaller than Europe. So the damage done by the U.S. one is, and this goes back to my honored history, honored tradition. The U.S. has been the leader on this, and once you break that, it's hard to get it back unless people really demand it. Maybe it'll come back stronger, or maybe it'll just sort of wither away. The United States decides it's America first, and refugees are, they're not being killed in Turkey and Lebanon. They're living lousy lives, but people are living lousy lives all over the world. It's just not. 50,000 is a pretty big number still, right? Americans could say, we're taking 50,000 refugees, come on. That's a cost of several billions of dollars. That's big enough. More than any other country in the world, or close to it. So we'll have to see what the American public thinks about this. Yeah.
On that. Do you think any other countries will be willing to pick up the slack?
Real interesting question. Trudeau said send them to us. We'll see if he meant it. But I was talking to an official at UNHCR about this, and they said that no European countries had even thought about this because they knew this was coming, and they hadn't even thought of it. So I don't think there's any interest in. You might have a few that want to, but why get off on the wrong foot with the president? You have other business you want to conduct. It's America's. This is part of the plenary power doctrine. When the Supreme Court announced it again in the 19th century, was that, and we'll talk about this as actually maybe a segue into our material. Is that immigration decisions go to the sovereignty of the country. It's seen as very fundamental. It's almost extra. It was described almost extra constitutionally. You don't need a constitutional power to regulate immigration because you can't be a nation unless you regulate immigration. And this was in fact Trump's assertion, which is an interesting one. And I'm not sure I disagree with it. During the election, that either you're a nation or you're not. Either you have a border that you enforce or you don't. And maybe we shouldn't have a border we enforce, but then it's really hard to talk about what the nation is, if anyone can be here, move in and out and the like. So that is seen as fundamental to sovereignty, and that would mean that other states are unlikely to criticize the United States for what is seen as domestic policy, because, as Sean said, they're doing the same thing. Right? The United States is still taking probably more refugees than all of Europe combined. Refugees through the refugee program. So they're going to have a hard time criticizing this, it seems to me. And maybe the president of Mexico could, because he's sort of on the outs right now, the president, but yeah. No, this is, and this does go to the readings for the week about, what the role of the state. I mean, what you see in a number of these theorists is that the creation of the field and the shift in the field had a lot